And we'll keep talking here with What's Your Point Overtime, streaming on fox26houston.com and on our Facebook page. From all of us here, have a safe and healthy week. Hey, great show, everybody.
We can't
hear you. Little editorial there at the end.
Can't hear you.
Unmute, Greg. Unmute.
Little editorial there at the end.
Oh, yeah.
You're entitled.
Governance.
So one thing that people need to be prepared for on this energy reorganization thing is there is going to be, if you want extra capacity in the grid to be able to be a buffer, there is going to be a cost for that because you're going to have wasted energy that's not going to be utilized when you're having to increase that buffer that's out there. They're saying that they're estimating that additional cost is going to be about $2 a month per household.
Where's this additional cost coming from, Bob?
The increasing the buffer on demand, on supply versus demand. Right now, there's a smaller margin. They're wanting to increase that margin so that there's room to move in there.
Hey, welcome to everybody who's joining us on What's Your Point Overtime. This is where there's really good stuff. Really good stuff. Okay, I'm going to go to Marcus Davis. What topic needs some more discussion today?
Carrot juice and granola.
Look, I wish I knew more about, you can get in the weeds pretty quickly when you start talking about TEA rules and the TEACs and all of the curriculum setting that goes on in Texas. But I'm a little worried. I mean, I'm a little worried about the restrictions here, Bob, and I don't want my kids indoctrinated. I want them educated. I want them to know what happened in the past so that we are not doomed to repeat it. And that's, is that a fundamental truth? I think we've learned that.
Well, it is a fundamental truth, and I don't think anybody's talking about taking out what has happened in the past from a factual standpoint. It's the politicization of this and the distortion of it that's going on that's causing concern among not only conservatives, but independents as well, who have realized that the left liberal portion of this country and now the growing Marxist socialist portion of this country have for decades taken over the education system in this country. And now you're seeing it bear fruit and come forward on this issue. Nobody's saying that we shouldn't teach about slavery. Nobody's saying that we shouldn't teach that the KKK was a horrible institution. Nobody's saying we shouldn't teach about Jim Crow laws from the past that were created by Democrats to overrun the minority communities in this country. Nobody's saying that we shouldn't teach about slavery and about the history of this country. Nobody's saying we shouldn't teach about what Americans did to the indigenous people of this country. Those are all horrible things, and our country has learned from that, and we've moved forward from that because we teach about it. This other distortion that's going on now is pure politics, and it's not historical, it's not fact-based, it's agenda-driven.
What's the distortion in the legislation that's in the state now that came from Tote?
What is that suppression is going on in there? You guys need to say specifically what's being ruled out from being taught. That's not the issue. The issue is coming out and teaching people that white people are bad because their skin is white and that black people are victims because their skin is black. That is what's being taught. When you listen to the conversations that are going on in California and Illinois and other cities across this country, that's what's causing this disruption.
The legislation
so we can have a reasonable discussion if we talk about the facts of what's being denied, what you think is going to be denied, which is not going to be denied in this. Give me some facts.
Hold on. I want to bring Charles Blaine in here because
I wanted to get the question answered.
He's had some issues with it.
Greg, he threw this out, and I wanted to ask the question.
Okay, I'm going to give you.
I'll come in later.
He accused certain people of taking control of education. When the legislation we're currently discussing comes out of the Woodlands, that is with regard to education, what exactly in that legislation is prudent and beneficial for Texas students? What is the purpose of it?
What do you think it's going to cause a negative issue?
No, I'm asking you, what is the
you don't
purpose
like
of
this
it?
bill because Steve Toth wrote it. That's the only reason you don't like this bill. You're not
No, that's
talking
not the
about
reason
what's in it you
I don't
don't
like the
like.
bill. Actually,
You
when
tell
I
me
found
what's
out
in
about
it
the
you
bill,
don't
I
like,
didn't
and
know
No.
I'll address
when I
that.
found out about the bill, I didn't know Steve Toth wrote it. When I saw some of the dumb stuff in it, that I knew that.
So
Steve
tell me
Toth
what that
had
dumb stuff is.
something to do with it. Well,
me
let's
what-
start with the Martin Luther King piece.
Tell me what you think this.
So
Okay, what about Martin Luther King?
Removing the teaching of Dr. Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream." What is the purpose of doing that?
That speech should be taught. That speech is an amazing piece of American history
So
that
is this
absolutely should be
legislation
taught.
saying that it
If
should or
that's not
shouldn't?
included in that, then that needs to be put back in there. And I don't know why it would be taken out. That's ridiculous.
Listen, here's what I have an exception on. It's almost as if this bill is like, let's deny what's going on. You cannot talk about what's going on in current events. So if George Floyd was murdered and critical race theory is now legislation, can't talk about it, can't talk about what's going on.
That's
Can't
not
talk about
true.
police. No, it says, like, let me just quote, the bill states that teachers cannot require, a teacher may not be compelled to discuss a particular current event or widely debated and current controversial issue of public policy or social first.
That
End
doesn't
quote.
say it can't be discussed. It says you can't compel a teacher to talk about something that they don't want to talk about.
Okay, now we're talking
It
about
doesn't say it
semantics.
can't be
Compelled to
discussed.
discuss,
But
discuss
that's
is the
not
same.
happening. I have a daughter who is a teacher, and I have never heard her come and say, they're making me talk about something I don't want to talk about. I think this whole law and this whole discussion, first of all, I can't believe the whole discussion or law even is dominating time in the legislature, because telling teachers what they should and should not teach is kind of akin to book burning and those kinds of things.
That's
But
why I asked, what was the purpose
it
of
looks
it?
like a solution, a so-called solution, that of a problem that doesn't exist.
So I think here's the thing. So I think when you look at like the Oklahoma legislation, what it says is what Bob's saying. You cannot teach people that one race is bad because of their skin color. You cannot teach them that one race is better. It's a very broad bill, but doesn't specify certain teachings or ban certain teachings. It just says that if you have an agenda, you cannot, a school district, school board, whatever, cannot compel a teacher to push forward this agenda. My issue with this bill, and it's not Steve Toth's bill, it is Brian Hughes in the Senate. It's his bill. That was the one that was filed during the special session. That Steve Toth's bill includes all the stuff that we mentioned, but Brian Hughes's bill, when you put them side by side, it removes Martin Luther King, Frederick Douglass, and the Emancipation Proclamation. And that, but it does still specify other things like teaching of the 13th Amendment, the 19th Amendment. It teaches teaching of, I think, broad-based constitutional teaching. There's a couple other very specific pieces of important historical documentation and important historical movements that have happened that require that are in there as requirements, but it specifically removes these three things and a few other things. And so that's where my issue is I don't understand why, if we're going to specify very specific things, what was the thought process to say, let's take these three things out? That's what
I don't think that I agree that the amendment or the new bill or the separate bill, yes, but the original bill. Look, I don't think that if you taught this idea of what happened during slavery and who were the slave holders, I don't think that that's teaching white people are bad. That's teaching what white people did. It's teaching the truth of what white people did. It's not saying, it's not necessarily saying that all white people are inherently bad. If you get that from that may be your guilt that's weighing in on you. But the idea that we had founding fathers, quote, people who started this nation for the purpose of having liberty and justice for all, but would not liberate their slaves, and they were white people, they would not liberate black people. That is a fact, and it is something that you can't escape, you can't deny, you can't erase unless you run the state legislature and you want to.
And I agree, and I think the original intent, which has long been lost with this whole debate over critical race theory, was to push back against this movement, which I think it's a more progressive movement of where like they were implementing these things. I think it was at like, I know the Department of Defense might have had it, the Smithsonian did it, where it was like these really weird anti-racism things that were over and above what should be expected from kind of being conciliatory about what happened. It was like well over and above some of the things. And I think it was just a backlash towards that. And then we got to this point today where now we're saying you have to ban or permit certain very specific teachings. And I think it's now too granular, in my opinion, because I don't know that legislators who've never been teachers should be specifically identifying what documents and books should be taught. It's a really weird place. It's like them telling like hospitals what tools to use when they've never done it themselves. So I don't know.
Keep in mind, we're talking about the people that can't solve our energy problem, right? But they can tell teachers how to teach. Get out of
Where
here.
does it?
But it also goes to, here's the other thing. It also goes to this whole issue of, does systemic racism exist? And so there's this whole camp that says it doesn't exist. And there's a camp that says, a larger camp that says, yes, it does exist. And so you're not allowed to teach that it exists, because there's a camp that says, no, 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 systemic racism isn't one of the founding principles of this country. This country is not, let's not talk about that. Let's not teach that. You're just in denial, right? And I think it's just.
Denial.
Yeah.
It's the lie.
Parents do a very good job of expressing their disappointment, frustration, and opposition to what teachers do and do not do in the classroom. And they tend to drive things a lot. Now that I have heard from my daughter, that parents will come forward if there's something that's, maybe crossing the line, they'll make their concerns known. And then schools have to decide, whether they're going to still push
And
forward.
Mark Levin made a really good point on this issue of saying that people need to bring you see cameras everywhere now, right? Make sure you've got your cameras in the classroom. And if you see something being done that's not proper, record it, report it, bring it out, let people know about it. Don't let it be hidden in the classroom, just like you don't want law enforcement hidden in the streets. Let it be known.
But difficult discussions is not something that's being done that's wrong.
And it's
That-
nothing new.
Discussions are not wrong. That's very true. But when it's agenda driven, that's a whole different issue.
Just like your daughter, Janice, we many of us know educators, and my partner's sister is a principal in Colorado, and the word critical race theory wasn't in the curriculum, right? They've been
Right.
teaching race and slavery. And so a parent says, well, are you teaching critical race theory? And she said, well, what is that? I mean, this is new to educators because they've been teaching about history, about slavery, about
And they
about
should be
Native
teaching
American
about that.
And so now
I'll tell
you're
you where
having
there is a
legislators
problem
say,
in the
well,
education
let's-
system.
Well,
My
let's
daughter-
control.
My daughter's been a teacher for almost 20 years, and I had this discussion with her the other day. And one of the biggest drawbacks for minorities, disadvantages for minorities in the education system, is the lack of identification of achieving students within the minority community. The designation of people to go into these advanced placement studies and that type of thing. She said, she has told me repeatedly that is a real drawback in the education system that's being missed and not being addressed, is the under-identification of achieving students.
Hey, I want to switch the topic real quick. We've talked about this on numerous shows. Do you believe that the short-circuiting, the derailing of felony bond reform will hurt Democratic candidates? You don't think it's going to hurt them, even if this week with the derailing of the constitutional amendment, which would have empowered Texans to have the choice of whether those with repeat violent offenses who have committed another heinous violent offense would be denied bond regardless of how much money they have. I mean, that's empowering Texans to make that decision. Do you think that issue will play out, will be put on the
No.
front burner by Republicans?
No, because the issue is here in Houston. This is a Harris County, Houston issue. Statewide, I'm sure there are many counties aren't paying attention to the felony bond reform that we're looking at right now.
But in
So
the 13
politically,
major
I don't think.
markets in this state, they are paying attention to it because it is not just a Houston problem. It's a Dallas problem. It's an Austin problem. It's a San Antonio problem. It's a Fort Worth problem. It's a Beaumont problem. It's a McAllen problem. It's a
Well, if it,
problem in
Bob,
every
if it is,
major
we're not
city in
here.
this country. And that is being reported out there. So I'm not sure where you're coming from. I do believe that the Democrats are going to be hit hard on their lack of responsibility. But Marcus's point is also valid, that maybe some of these really important issues should have been moved up in the legislative agenda during the regular session and gotten done instead of being used as a leveraging tool to try to get this other bill passed. You know, bills need to stand on their own merit, and we need to move them through it as to their level of importance to society. I think there's blame on both sides of this matter, but clearly the Democrats, with their taking off to Washington, D.C. for their super spreader event, that is irresponsibility. That is interference in the process of democracy in this state. And it was wrong when Republicans did it in Oregon. It was wrong when Texas Democrats have done it here in the past. It was wrong anytime an elected official is abdicating their job to go off and do a political stunt like this.
Janice, you were going to say something? Janice, you were going to say something? I'm trying to moderate a little.
You know, Chow said it when we were on the air. At some point, you decide you're going to take a stand, and that's what they did, and they are sticking to that. And I'm kind of thankful that they are, because they are preventing the passage of legislation that would set us back decades.
Tell me specifically, where does this set us back decades? Where does this set us back 2 years?
I think Harris County did a really good job and moved us far forward in terms of the advances that were implemented in the last election cycle, in terms of making it easier for people to go and vote. Now,
that is lawlessness, Janice. That is lawlessness.
I don't think my mother going through a drive-through is lawlessness.
It is lawless because the legislature says that's not legal. The
Well,
legislature makes the laws on voting,
hold on
not
for a
the
second.
county commissioners.
If it was so great and it was going to be
Smooth.
legally permissible, why didn't Travis County do it? Why didn't Dallas County do it?
They didn't innovate the way we innovated. We have to
They
ask
said
the law.
no. They said
And they were
no.
scared to death of Ken Paxton.
Did we lose? Oh, no. We lost Marcus, I think.
Oh well, sorry. So the
I mean,
county
that's the
judge
question.
does
What-
not
what-
have the legal authority to change voting process. That, by the Constitution of the United States and by the Constitution of the state of Texas, that is the job of the Texas legislature, not some county judge.
They had the opportunity to adopt the same accommodations. Now they're arguing that that their voting rights have been stripped, rights they didn't even give themselves during a window of opportunity. I mean, I don't get that. I think
the thing is, I think, and I'm not I don't agree with it, but I think the thing is they saw it in Harris County and they hope to do it in the future. And now this is going to prohibit them from doing it in the future.
That's a
But
good
I
point.
think the fundamental difference is that with like the left believes, they're just, I don't know. I mean, a lot of people on the left feel that anything that does not make it easier to vote amounts to voter suppression, and I don't agree with that. That's my thing. It should be easy to vote, but just because we don't progressively make it easier and easier and easier, because we could do everything like make text voting a thing, and that would be incredibly easy. But if we don't do that, that does not mean that it's voter suppression. And so exactly. And so I think that's where there's this difference where you could progressively make it easier, but not doing so does not equal voter suppression. And so that's where I'm kind of stuck. Where like, do I agree with what they did? No. Do I think it was, I don't agree with the 24-hour or the overnight, but I also don't think that scaling it back was voter suppression, because people who voted prior to that are still going to be able to vote. There's no one's right is being denied to them. And so that's where I struggle to understand where the Democrats are coming from on this. Yeah,
I'll tell you where there is
I'll tell
voter
you who's right is
suppression.
being. I tell you who's right is being denied, and I agree with you, Charles. I'm having a tough time with seeing it as suppression. Now, the idea that they're trying to make this last stand because the Voting Rights Act has very few legs to stand on, that's a whole different thing. But I don't know that getting rid of drive-through and getting rid of 24-hour is oppressive as much as it is oppressive for the county. I do have an issue with the idea that the state is trying to tell the county, how they should best turn out elections, how they should best.
Because it's their job to do that.
Yeah, county government is an extension of
I'm about to
state
say,
government by statute. Am I not correct, Bob?
Yes, that
County
is correct. The
government
county
is
No, no, no,
government,
I-
of state
I-
county government exists because of
I
the
am-
authority
I am
given
not-
to
I am
it.
not denying
Marcus, I'm
that.
talking here. The county
But
government is
well,
given
since
the
we're finished,
authority.
I wasn't finished talking when everybody just decided to jump in.
Well,
So
then,
if I
by
can
God, go
finish-
ahead and finish your
If I can
dialogue then.
finish, I was stating that from a state who does not want to be subjected to the federal government, it's amazing how we don't want the federal government to overreach into Texas, but Texas is okay with overreaching into the state. That's the point that I was trying to make. I
Well,
know
good.
that the
I'll
state-
address that
I
point
know that the
specifically
state
here.
has the job of that, but if a county comes up with an idea on how to turn out voters and it doesn't break any moral code or any, then they should have that should be permissible. That was the point I was making.
That is
And I see that,
lawlessness. And
Marcus,
let me answer his question. His question was, why are we opposed to overreaching federal government but supporting what you call overreaching state government? The Constitution of the United States in the 10th Amendment says that all powers not specifically granted to the federal government belong to the state and to the local governments. The local governments get their power from the state. The state is the governing authority of the county governments and of the city governments. That is why those powers exist. And the
Bob,
county
I heard
judges
Marcus-
do not have the legal authority to create election law and election
So is that the
process.
whole reason we have what's going on in Austin is that it's just a matter of you shouldn't have done this, so we're gonna slap your hand and we're gonna like.
And that's
No,
what
it's
it
not.
is.
It's to give equal protection to every community in this state. The voters in Travis County should have the same rights to vote as the voters in Harris County.
So
The
why
voters in
can't-
Dallas
so
County
let
should
them
have the
do
same
what
right to
Harris
vote
County
as the
did.
voters in Travis County. If you don't
But do they,
do that,
Bob?
if you allow the states to just make stuff up as they go.
Bob, are you telling me that Harris County has the exact same rules for voting as Tarrant County, as Austin, every county has the exact
That's
same
true, they
rules
don't.
on where to vote, when to vote, what time to vote? All the rules are the same?
They are subjected to the same laws within that. And they're
I
given
get
certain,
that.
they're given by law, certain delegation of authorities to pick their polling location and to do all these other types of things. But to make up stuff, you said they're taking away drive-through voting. Drive-through voting never legally existed in Texas. You said they're taking away 24-hour voting. 24-hour voting never legally existed in Texas. Lena Hidalgo made that up as a dictator in this county and implemented her will on the people of Texas. The votes in Harris County reflect impact statewide. Every county has a reason to be concerned when the most populous county in the state starts making up stuff to try to shift the burden of voter turnout.
Look,
But
the
what's
argument,
harm,
We're in the
Bob?
middle
What's
of a
the harm?
pandemic.
the argument has been made that if you have greater access to the polls in the major population centers, I mean, those that can afford to staff and fund drive-through voting and 24-hour voting, but in the rural areas where you have very limited funding, you have a two-class system where,
Absolutely.
and from a political standpoint, where you have the concentrations of Democratic voters are in the metropolitan areas, they have an advantage over the more rural counties. I'm just repeating the argument I've heard. Does that in fact create a two-class system?
It
I mean,
does, and it
if-
violates the Equal Protection Act under the Constitution of the United States, because some people are given more rights to vote than other people are given within the state. That's not fair, it's not right, and it's not legal.
So currently, one county doesn't give more opportunity to vote an hour a day to its voters?
The hours are set by the legislature.
Yeah, and it's right now, I mean, the big cities
days
already
and
have
times.
greater access because
Right.
the legislature has granted them longer hours and more time on the weekends. Is that correct, Capro?
That
I
is
believe
correct.
so.
That's
Yeah,
correct.
and so,
What did you say, Greg?
but this would make it even more unequal.
And
Unless
not
you're
only-
going to
not only more
provide the
hours-
resources to the counties to have, say, Duval County gets 24-hour voting and they can't afford it, but we're going to fund it.
Well, they implemented countywide voting. Does every county have that? I don't know. I'm asking. Does every county have countywide voting? Because I know they did that, 2018, was it? 2019 when they did countywide voting?
Well, early voting is a different issue than the election day voting, and that's addressed. One of the things that this bill does is it expands early voting into smaller counties than were done in the past. Again, that's the legislature making the decision to do that, as is their constitutional right and duty to do so. The issue in Harris County is that the judge had no legal authority to do that. She got slapped down repeatedly by the Texas Supreme Court on these issues.
Hey, I want to, before we get about 5 minutes left, I want to go to the issue of ballot initiatives. We have two people I know are pretty well informed on that.
That's where the real voter suppression is happening.
Amen.
Are we going to see the two ballot initiatives that have gained sufficient figures on signatures on the ballot soon, Charles? What's the update?
So the current update is that the mayor has said that he's going to bring the decision before council before the August 16th deadline, but he's going to make them decide between putting it on the November 2021 ballot or on the November 2023 ballot, which would be the municipal election cycle. And so I hope that we see it on the November 2021 ballot. We'll fight to make sure that that's a reality. So we'll see what happens. We're going to do everything we can to make sure that it's on this ballot.
So for viewers who don't know, Charles was one of those who spearheaded an initiative that would allow 3 council members in agreement to have the power to put an item on the city agenda, a city council's agenda. That power lies almost exclusively with the mayor right now. Janice, what's going on with the firefighters?
Well, right now, they're waiting for the petitions to be verified. What was submitted to the city secretary was a nice little package that was all pre-verified, which would make her job very, very easy. And state law does allow, if you want to talk about state law here, state law does allow for sampling, statistical sampling. And they could go in and pull a sample of those petitions and confirm pretty quickly that there are indeed enough valid petitions there to put this issue on the ballot. We have not heard anything. She's had them now, I think, 2 weeks, and could be done with it by now, but we have not heard anything as to where they are in the process in terms of verifying the petitions. And like Charles said, we don't know what's going to happen in terms of getting both of these issues onto the ballot. And just so people understand, the other issue that is being looked at by the city secretary right now is a petition that would grant binding arbitration when labor disputes reach an impasse, as they have with the firefighters and the city of Houston for the last 4 years now.
So bottom line, Sylvester Turner has the votes, the sway on council to postpone this, doesn't he?
Yeah, I would say so. I'd be surprised if he didn't.
Right.
I don't know that he can win in the courts.
Current power, the power to prevent the power shift resides, right? It's kind of like the state legislature not wanting people to be taught certain things, so they make legislation.
Hey, I want to clarify something real quick. Look, I talked about election reform, election suppression. And as a reporter, I think there's been an extraordinary amount of gaslighting on both sides. I think that the amount of fraud, whether election altering fraud, has been gaslighted by folks on the right. I believe the using the term Jim Crow 2 and extensive suppression is gaslighting on the left. So I get frustrated. Anyway, that's just my take. I'll shut up.
And I agree. And that's the problem that we got, right? That we want everything to be seen through our partisan lens. I'll end on this miscarriage of justice, or this lack of patriotism that we witnessed this week. This un-American act of sentencing the insurrectionists to only 8 months in jail. A person that went onto national grounds with the intent of stopping a federal process from taking place. It was treasonous, it was sedition, and we failed to try them on these charges. And we as a nation, our justice system failed to convict them of these charges and sentence them to these charges. It It is.
You're saying
it is-
appropriately in your mind, not
It-
because
it-
he was found guilty and he was sentenced.
No, not of treason or sedition.
Okay.
The acts that they committed qualified for the definition of treason and the definition of sedition. And we didn't charge them with that. And then the things that they did charge them with, the judge only gave him 8 months instead of the full time of law. Had any of those people been named Habib with a turban on their head, that would not have happened.
Right.
And that is the second definition we have today of privilege.
Any final words?
I want to go back to one thing Marcus was asking about earlier about the states and federal governments and stuff. We need to remember that the federal government exists because of the states, not the other way around. The states created the federal government. The states gave the federal government limited authority, limited control, and limited rule over the states. The states are the ultimate authority in lawmaking in the United States, and it should remain that way. There's been a push in the last century to shift that, to think that the federal government is the all-encompassing, all-knowing, all-seeing federal power. That is not the way this country was designed, and we need to make sure that the legislatures are protected, and the legislatures need to make sure that they are the ones that are making the calls and protecting their constitutional rights.
Yeah,
I think
and
that's a
Bob,
great-
it wasn't a question. It wasn't a question. I'm clear on how the law works and how, historically this nation was built. I'm talking about the irony of it. The same way we don't want to.
Not irony, it's the way the system was made.
I got it. The system was also.
I call it
made with-
hypocrisy. It's not even irony, Marcus.
Thank
It's
you,
hypocrisy.
Thank you. That's what I was.
The
going
law.
I think that's fruit for another
and
full
the law once
discussion on the
said that I
next
shouldn't
edition
be
of
sick.
What's Your Point? I'm going to say good morning to all of you.
All right.
Marcus has businesses to run. Bob has articles to write. Janice has
take my dog
strategy
out.
to develop. Charles has minds to change. Cal has fun to be
A
had.
petition.
Yeah,
to
I'm gonna
trade.
go walk the surf, walk the coast.
We all
Have fun.
we're
Well,
working out right now, so.
Deuces.